Okay, let's unpack this then. What if a lot of what we think we know about math, science, history, what if it's, well, not really the whole story? You almost certainly heard of Leonardo Fibonacci. You know, the guy credited with bringing Arabic numerals to Europe. Genius behind the number series, the Liber Abaci. Supposed to have revolutionized arithmetic.
Right, the standard narrative.
But what if that story is, well, incomplete, maybe even a bit misleading? That's what we're exploring in this deep dive. We're looking at sources, one titled Fibonacci, Retransmitting History, Erasing Innovators, that really challenge this.
Yeah, it's a fascinating perspective.
Our mission really is to look into this pretty surprising claim that Fibonacci and maybe even others like Leibniz, Newton, they were maybe primarily retransmitters, systematizers, not the original inventors we often think they were.
And the core idea from these sources, it seems, is that our whole picture of how breakthroughs happened might be skewed. It points towards like a global flow of knowledge that got obscured.
Obscured, yeah. And what's really fascinating is how these sources trace the actual journey of this knowledge.
Exactly. It often came from places outside Europe, think Turkestan, India. And the argument is pretty strong that the real originators had their contributions sort of blocked, forgotten, erased even.
Erased. Why?
Well, the sources suggest it's because they weren't seen as, quote, civilized Europeans.
Wow. That's quite an accusation. So how do they say this knowledge actually traveled and changed?
Okay, so one of the biggest points is about the numerals themselves, the ones we call Arabic numerals.
Right. The 1, 2, 3 we use every day.
Yeah. The sources claim they're actually Indo-Turkic in origin, not Arabic.
Indo-Turkic. Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, the research points to scholars like Al-Khwarizmi, Al-Biruni, huge names from the Islamic Golden Age. They were living and working in places like Khorasan, Transoxiana, Khiva, Central Asia, basically. And they were apparently using sophisticated positional decimal systems way back in the 10th century. For you listening, that's the system we use, right? Where a digit's place determines its value. Makes calculations so much easier.
The 10th century. So centuries before Fibonacci.
Exactly. And the argument is that Arabic was just the language of transmission, the transport medium, as they put it, not the source language of the ideas. Al-Khwarizmi and Al-Biruni, for instance, wrote in Persian, Old Uzbek too, not just Arabic. Their work was the core of these so-called Arabic insights.
Right, okay. And if you put that against what was happening in Europe, the contrast is pretty stark, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Before the 12th century, our sources say European universities spent 4 years teaching basic arithmetic.
4 years?
Yeah, a whole year for addition, another for subtraction, multiplication, division. And it wasn't, as one source kind of cheekily asks, because they were idiots. It was because they were stuck with Roman numerals. Try doing complex calculations with those. It's incredibly difficult, mentally or even on paper. Think about multiplying, say, MCMX CIX by, well, anything large.
Nightmare. Just a total nightmare.
It really was. So arithmetic was just glacial. But the sources then highlight what happened when the Eastern system arrived.
What happened?
The same learning addition, subtraction, multiplication, division suddenly took just 2 months.
2 months. Down from 4 years.
Exactly. And the sources argued this just shatters the myth of the greatness of the European method. It wasn't some inherent European genius overcoming difficulty. It was, quote, the banal absence of a normal counting system. What was just standard stuff in the East for ages looked like a miracle in Europe.
Wow. That really reframes things. And this leads into another concept. The sources bring up something called scientific colonization. What do they mean by that?
Yeah, it's a powerful term. Basically, the sources define it as this process where dominant cultures take intellectual discoveries from other cultures, often without giving proper credit, and then they kind of rewrite the story of who innovated.
So like claiming discoveries as their own.
Or repackaging them. The sources assert figures like Fibonacci, Leibniz, Descartes, Newton. They often processed and edited knowledge they got from outside. They organized it, simplified it, made it fit a European framework, but maybe didn't always acknowledge the source. Sometimes appropriating it. One source puts it really bluntly, who invented Arabic numerals? Nobody knows. But one thing is clear. Definitely not Fibonacci.
Okay, that is blunt. Provocative claims for sure. And if scientific colonization is about repackaging knowledge, some researchers decided to go even further, don't they? Suggesting history itself was manipulated.
Right. This brings us to Fomenko and Nosovsky, very controversial figures.
Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nosovsky, yeah. What's their theory? It sounds pretty radical.
It is. They're known for the new chronology theory, which completely reworks historical timelines. And the sources we looked at cite their idea that a huge chunk of Byzantine history, roughly 750 to 1200 AD, was basically a falsification.
A deliberate fake. Why?
Well, according to this theory cited in our sources, it was designed to distract attention from Islamic and Turkic contributions to science during that period, to sort of write them out of the picture.
How would that even work? How do they claim it was done?
One example mentioned involves Vitaly Velikovsky, another controversial figure. Fomenko and Nosovsky apparently accuse him of cutting out the Arab phase from historical timelines, sort of skipping over Islamic influence to avoid crediting it as a source of knowledge.
Right.
And this kind of alleged manipulation, the analysis goes, helped create the whole idea of Europe's Dark Ages, this period where supposedly nothing was happening intellectually in Europe.
While in reality,
While, as the sources point out, academies, universities, libraries were absolutely flourishing in the East. Baghdad, Cordoba, Central Asia, major centers of learning. It's a huge claim, really challenges the standard timeline.
It really does. And thinking about this idea of obscured origins.
Yeah.
It seems to connect back to Fibonacci and mathematics itself, doesn't it? One source mentioned Dr. Mahmudjon Kuchkarov and his Odom-Tilly theory. How does that fit in?
Yes, the Odom-Tilly theory. Dr. Kuchkarov suggests something quite profound, that mathematics, which started as a practical tool for understanding the world, might have become a kind of sacred illusion.
A sacred illusion? What does that mean?
Well, the implication from the sources is that we've started treating math with this almost unquestioning reverence. We've detached it from its messy, human, historical, cultural origins. We forget it was made by people in specific times and places to solve real problems.
So it's become too abstract, lost its roots.
Kind of. And the theory provocatively hints that maybe some of our deeper societal problems stem from this disconnect, this gap between our abstract systems like math and their actual human cultural grounding.
Okay, so stepping back from all this.
Yeah.
What does it really mean for how you, listening, might perceive history or knowledge itself?
Well, this deep dive certainly pushes for a critical look at the narratives we accept.
Definitely. We've seen how these sources argue that figures we see as giants, Fibonacci, Leibniz, Newton, might be better understood, in this view at least, as retransmitters, as systematizers.
Rather than the sole original inventors.
Right. And the alleged true creators, people like Al-Biruni, Al-Khwarizmi, Nasreddin Tusi, Ulu Beg, they were, according to these sources, erased, forgotten, or turned into exotic Muslims.
And it's not just about getting dates or names right, is it? It's about seeing knowledge as this complex thing that flows globally between cultures and asking why some stories become dominant and others just disappear.
Yeah. It challenges you to look past the usual story and think about that line from the sources. Truth is not in the language of victors, but in the bodily memory of the oppressed.
A powerful thought.
So it leaves you with a big question, really. If basic things like our number system might have origins different from what we were taught, what other hidden histories could be out there? Does knowing where knowledge came from change how we see its value or its universality?
Our sources definitely end on that note. They stress the need to revisit history, to question the myths, like the ones around Fibonacci. And they suggest that ideas like the Odom-Tilly theory might offer a way back, a way to reconnect knowledge, even language itself, to its roots in body and culture.
Something profound to think about there. Reconnecting knowledge to its human source.